Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope y'all enjoyed my 5-star plan kind of breakdown over the last week. It was necessary. I kept them short, kind of pithy, trying to drive just to the main points. Reason being, I went to Arkansas. This episode is going to relate to directly with the idea, so I went to Arkansas, and what did I see? So please come and join me on the podcast, and I'll tell you all about it. So, took the family on a vacation. We went to Arkansas. Hot Springs, to be, I guess, more accurate descriptor. And a couple of key takeaways. Based upon the little interaction I had when I was in Hot Springs. I mean, I probably talked to a couple dozen people and just hang out, observed, walked around, toured around. A couple things struck me. One, these folks don't seem to be embarrassed of what and who they are. Two, they still enjoy their history and they kind of revel in the idea of some of the things that took place in Hot Springs and what is all involved with that part of the country, if you will. And I guess the third thing is, while it's a bit of a melting pot, it still has a distinct identity that's largely based upon the people that have been there for a very long time. So I guess those would be the three things that struck me most as far as interesting. The other thing I would say, at least in the area around Hot Springs where I was around, it seems to me that that part of Arkansas is what I always imagined Texas was going to be like when I first moved here. And honestly, largely it was that way, even in Collin County up until probably about 10 years ago. And then the acidification began to come in full speed. And I guess the big wheels, the corporate interests, I guess, for lack of a better term, the coastals came in and kind of, or if you will, the Brian McClanahan term, Yankees came in and made themselves known and kind of started to remake at least this area of Texas, right? So now we're embarrassed of our past. We're embarrassed of who we are. We're even co-opting our schools now to teach how we're terrible people. And apparently, the majority of the people in the area just seem to be okay with it. Now, in fairness, I did not see a lot of the General Lee cars and the battle flag floating around, but I did see a lot of Arkansas state flags. And I equate that in some ways to the way the Texas state flag flies around. Arkansas never had the audacity to be its own country, but I think there's a significant amount of pride in being Arkansan, right? So it was just interesting. It was fun. Great place to visit. I don't know that that's the ideal place that I would want to live, but great place to visit. Recommend it. On the downside, now aside from driving through Hope, which for those of you who know, there is a significance to that city, but that pales to the comparison that apparently is upon Hot Springs as being the boyhood home of a former president. They aren't ashamed of it, but I don't think they celebrate it like they once did. Maybe because the guy just has lost his shine, or maybe because it's been, 20 years since he was in office. I was never a huge fan one way or the other, but I could at least see the appeal, particularly in the 90s. But again, there's really no noticeable shame. I did kind of get the feeling that in parts of town, in Hot Springs is kind of laid out in an odd pattern because a little connecting area, if you will, goes between two wings of what is the national park. And one side of the road is the national park, and the other side is, the city. And it's maybe a quarter mile to a half mile wide in that little section in there. And then there's a whole other piece of the city that is surrounded by a national park. But I got to say, there's a lot of this city that just looks like it's way past its heyday. And I don't know if it's because the population's dropped. I don't know if it's because of the heavy dependence on tourism. I don't know if it's directly related to what happened with 08, 09, and now again 19 and 20. It just seems like there was a lot of stuff that was just kind of sad shape. The other thing that I noticed, and I got to admit, I've noticed it around here too, people are hurting for employees, finding people to go to work. I mean, I can't tell you the number of restaurants and stores that, were basically begging for people to come to work, and they had limited hours because they couldn't find willing workers. Now, some of that is because we foolishly pay people to stay home, and they make enough money staying home that there's no desire to go to work. I guess the second thing would be is there's people that are legitimately scared and don't want to go to work. Okay. And then there's just not as many people as there once were at a working age that are willing to go to work. And for me personally, I just found that frustrating. There were several, I guess I'd call them restaurants or bars that we went to, and one of them, was sorely understaffed. The other one was understaffed, but not terribly so. Both are on a lake. Both looked like everybody, was treated well, and, was very friendly, right? The Southern hospitality was alive and well in all the places that I went when I was in the area. So I just really struggled to figure out why there wouldn't be a bunch of college-age students that didn't want to work at a restaurant or a bar, where particularly you can make quite a bit of money with tips, and it's on a lake. I mean, it's a pretty view, nice people. I'm just guessing lake people pay well because they're in a good mood and they are getting liquored up, so they're going to tip. It was a weird situation. The other thing that I found kind of interesting is the very quick transition from, I guess, city center to rural. There isn't really a significant suburban area because I forgot the exact population, but I want to say it was 50, 60,000. I could be wrong. It's not a very big city. And like I said, and clearly a good chunk of it is past its prime. And the whole time I was there, I kept thinking to myself, man, if I had $500,000 or if I had even $250,000 and I had some people that would partner with me, there's half a dozen businesses we could pop in here and they would probably do all right. And certainly there's plenty of storefronts that are probably available for a very reasonable price. And all I could see was the possibilities, and the ideas flowed rapidly to the point where my wife goes, no, we're not moving here. And it's not necessarily that would be what I want to do, but I always just go that direction when I'm on vacation or where I'm someplace new. It's like, what do I see here that could happen? What would be interesting here? Now, one of my old standbys is, there's a reason why there's not bookstores anymore. I mean, Amazon and Walmart.com and all these various online things, they sell books and people don't even leave their homes. But what if you had like a library that had specialty books? What if you had a bookstore that had specialty books, but you could lend them or read them? So in other words, they were both for sale and for borrowing. And what if they were themed, right? If you had a theme book. And, one of the things that I've kicked around with some friends of mine every once in a while is, what if you did like the Lost Liberty Lounge concept, right? You put the Green Dragon out front and you serve adult beverages, you serve coffee, maybe have some little snacks. You've got this kind of exclusive library of liberty-orientated books and movies and such. And maybe you've got like a little back office meeting room, and up front you've got like lounge seats and relaxing. And then you just invite people to come in and give talks. Maybe not every night, but 2-3 nights out of the week. And you encourage people to come in and say, hey, come in, buy a drink, hang out. We're going to have, I guess, the French had the salon area. Well, what would be different than that, right? It's this whole era of people are discussing things or having these conversations. But that's one of the things we don't do well anymore either. Is we're afraid to talk politics. We're afraid to talk money. We're afraid to talk religion. As a matter of fact, most churches are scared. They won't even talk about, issues that would be deemed political. Indeed, we've got an entire faction of our church people that, actively oppose any interaction on those issues because they might get their hands dirty. Now, and I don't want to go off on that rabbit trail. I've done that enough. But while I was there, Hot Springs is kind of a touristy area. It's in a park. Maybe not the most ideal town to do this. I didn't really see any colleges or a plethora of young people, but I could see where maybe you could do that as a seasonal thing there. Just like as an attraction, and you could have different speakers come in, and maybe you could put on, different little dinner place. I mean, if you've got a constant flux of people coming in and out, you've always got a new audience, right? I don't know. It's just a thought. And one of the other things is, there's, I guess there's opportunities because there's plenty of land available there. And I mean, there's realtors, but let's face it. A lot of people that move to the Ozarks or move to Hot Springs area are probably not wanting to be in the city for a reason. They probably would like to do certain things. I'm thinking maybe you could do some kind of development business where we help you kind of turn the farmland into something more useful. Maybe help you plant orchards. Maybe just kind of plan out a like a farmstead even. There's just different ways you could do it. Just kind of like a low impact, high yield situation, if you will. I'm just saying there's lots of water. The soil's kind of rocky, for lack of a better term. But it's really interesting. I mean, when we were on Washita Lake, I was basically walking down a vein of quartz. It was interesting to just see how close to the surface some of these minerals are. And, we don't mine it. I guess we don't technically need to mine it. And Washita Lake is just beautiful. I can't imagine that we want to risk damaging the lake so you can get a couple tons of quartz or whatever's there. But again, this is just things I think about. I've had similar thoughts. I've had a trip to Colorado or two. I've had one in New Mexico. There's always things. And I tend to drift in the political, in case you haven't remembered or noticed. But there's always like these opportunities. There's these businesses, and it's not the idea that you want to get rich. It's the idea that you want to be self-sustaining and educational and interactive and, improve the area that you're in. And when I go into town and I just see a bunch of buildings boarded up and, obviously what was once something nice is not anymore. It just makes me sad. It reminds me of like the old parts of historic towns, even here in Texas area, where clearly we don't really have that major issue right now because so many people are coming to North Texas. But when we first got here, there were a lot of buildings that just were past their prime. They're, maybe you got something in the first floor, but the second, third, and fourth floor are largely empty. And I can't help but think if I'm the owner of that, why wouldn't I want to invest and why wouldn't I want to try and actively get people that want to be there? Surely there's got to be a market for it. I mean, maybe that's the problem. Maybe there's really not a market. Maybe they make more money by having it sit empty and claiming the losses on their taxes. I really don't know. I can't grasp some of the games that are played, but I always think is how can I make a better situation for myself and those around me? In symbiotic businesses and forums and those kinds of things, again, the idea is no, I'm not trying to get rich. I don't want to necessarily not have to ever work again. But I'd like to at least be self-sustaining. I'd like to have a profit to where I can provide for the family, right? But these are the things I look at. And so while I'm cruising around in Arkansas, or, north Texas, northeast Texas, jokingly, right? I just was, that was the other thing I noticed. There was an enormous amount of Texas vehicles in the area. We went up to go to the tower on Hot Springs Mountain or hill, whatever. In the park there, at least a third of the vehicles were from Texas. And again, the little downtown area there, very interesting, very nice. Clearly new things are moving in. It corresponds somewhat with what I noticed in Branson. Now, when I was in Branson, I kind of remarked to several friends of mine that Branson was, in my mind, what I always envisioned Vegas to be. And obviously not with the extreme, over-the-top crazy that goes with Vegas, but just the idea that always reinventing itself, always bringing in something new, something gets boarded up, shut down, torn down, something new goes in there. And that's kind of what Branson was like when I was there a few years ago. And it was really interesting. I mean, there was clearly brand new things that were there. Then there were stuff that there were businesses and buildings that were older, but had been there for a while and were still doing well. And maybe were being tweaked and changed. And then there was stuff where, boy, that had recently just closed. Or maybe that closed 3-4 years ago. And then there was coming soon signs out. And, there was lots of action. I didn't see a lot of that when I was in Hot Springs. Now, there was some new stuff and, the town spreading out from the center. And that's, I guess they call it sprawl or, there are all these different derogatory terms when a city grows out beyond its central area. So I got to wonder if it was really cheaper and more cost effective to build out on the edge of town, because it's really not that many people once you get outside of town. So it didn't really make a lot of sense. Now I can see definite advantages being on or near the lake, and most of the downtown area is not down on or near the lake. But there is the hot springs there. There are, other attractions, but it's an interesting situation. The other thing that I thought was kind of neat is there's a downtown tower there that they say was basically the first skyscraper. And it's on the front it says it's the Medical Arts Building. There was a huge Army Navy hospital there, which I guess now is largely abandoned, used for other things. And they used to have a physical health center there. Back when people still believed that there was healing properties to the water that came out of the hot springs. And I believe that they did work because they wouldn't keep going there if they didn't. But they even reference how modern medicines kind of took away the benefits of that. Where something would maybe take 3 weeks. You could take this pill for a week and you're better. So there is something to be said for that. Changing and the less demand for those services or that whole area. But it was just striking to me, these giant buildings and these great big things that are present, and they're just largely not being used, and they're in kind of a sorry shape. I mean, the Arlington Hotel, when we visited in there, it's the second time I've been in it, and it just struck me how this was once this grand building, this, object to behold, and it's just kind of in a sad shape. And I don't know that that's anybody's fault. I mean, time marches on, and it's, when it's no longer elite, it's no longer elite. But there's really nothing there I shouldn't say that. The Embassy Suites that we stayed at the last time I was there, which was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, at least at this point, that was really nice. And it's right next to their convention center. So it's not without new stuff. It's just kind of has that not quite sure what we're going to do here feel. But in any case, back to the Medical Arts Building. Now, the Medical Arts Building is quite impressive, and it actually looks like it's built into the wall of rock behind it. They said it was the tallest building when it was built in the area, and it's really impressive. And then he said, well, hey, we just sold the building. Dr. Patel's purchased it. I'm like, well, it's not super helpful because there's plenty of people that are in the last name of Patel, and I'm sure there's more than one Dr. Patel. But okay. But they were saying how they're going to spend a couple $1 million to revitalize and revamp this building. And I'm like, well, what are they going to do with it? I mean, it's a large building. It was an office suite. I guess they might have used part of it as apartments or hotel. So it's possible that they could turn it in, multi-use building. It looks beautiful, but clearly needs work. Clearly in a bad state of disrepair. And unfortunately, when you deal with the historic committees, they like to make things more challenging than they should be. When you're trying to bring a building back from the brink, yes, of course you want to keep it aesthetically pleasing and architecturally sound, but there's so many different modern techniques and materials available that you're prevented from using because somebody might not say it looks period proper. Oh man, come on. That's just frustrating. So, I guess there's a couple more things I'd like to say about my little trip to Arkansas. So, there was some touristy stuff there for sure. And I guess if I was a little more loose with the money, I would have blown quite a bit on the tourist stuff there, which is not to say it wasn't nice and it wasn't, appropriate, and the people were very, very nice everywhere we went. Lake Hamilton, which is basically through a portion of the town, is quite nice. Lots of homes on it, very much built up. One of the interesting things I found out is they actually lower the lake level about 10 foot in the winter months. I guess in case they get a freeze, it protects all the docks and everything. I guess secondarily, they retain the water up in Lake Washita to maintain levels. So that was kind of interesting. I didn't realize they did that. In closing, there's something to be said for celebrating your past and not being ashamed of it. And one of the things that I found that was, I guess, interesting, this trip versus the last trip, there was some different exhibits that were in the national park portion that basically were quite clear. This was part of the segregated South. There were essentially two different societies operating here. But it was very straightforward. Everything I read did not come across super slanted or bitter. I guess it didn't hide what it was. And I kind of appreciated that. I think that my daughter, who was too young to remember the last time we were there, she kind of was, I guess, not surprised, but more like reminded, oh yeah, that was an issue here too. One of the things that I always found striking is reading multiple articles about how they didn't like the springs to be pooled above the bathhouses so that the poor people that couldn't pay to be in the nice bathhouse would use the water before it would come to them. And they kind of made it sound as if they were somehow ruining the water or contaminating or whatever else. And there might be some truth to that. As far as technically speaking, I think it was more of a obstinance or superiority issue than anything else. And again, I accept that people think that way. I mean, if I'm paying for something, I want the premium product, right? If I want to go sit in the mud bath on a wood shack on the side of a hill, I don't necessarily expect to be paying much of anything. So I could see where they don't want to necessarily share the same spring. I believe there was 70 some springs at one point. I think they're down to 58. But when the water's coming out at 140 degrees, it's pretty hot. There's not a lot that's going to be in there. And quite frankly, it's going to probably kill any of the bugs that might come across. I mean, it's not full on boiling, but it's very unpleasant if you touch it the way it is. Or if you were to jump in it, I should say. Put your hand in it, it doesn't feel all that great after an extended period of time. It's hot. It's noticeably hot. It's really interesting. And what's even better is it doesn't have that sulfur odor that people expect. So, I guess, long story short, Hot Springs was a nice place to visit. Got some pretty interesting tidbits of information and history I picked up while I was there. Well worth the time. Very much exudes the old school South Texas vibe, right? The old school South / Texas vibe. Didn't see a bunch of people running around in jacked up pickups with the rebel flag running around, hanging out the back or anything. So you guys can put that out of your mind. That's not what I was referring to. Just general hospitality, friendliness, the sweet tea, that kind of whole business. All those stereotypes that I expected when I moved to Texas some 20 some odd years ago still hold true in where we're at in a good chunk of Hot Springs. Very nice, very pleasant. I guess the most curious thing I have is where are they going to be in 4 or 5 years? Sooner or later, the government's going to run out of money, and they're not going to be able to keep throwing money at people forever. And those people are going to have to go back to work. Be interesting to see how many of those businesses are still open after all this. Was just kind of a stark realization of that we live in a bubble in North Texas, Collin County. Things are generally significantly better here than they must be other places, because it was just really eye-opening that, the whole trip back, East Texas, large, pass going through there, just, I don't know. It's really interesting, folks. I'm very grateful that I live in North Texas. I'm very grateful that our state is in such better shape than many other states around us. But I caution, we do so many things and we expect government to do so many things for us, based upon the idea that the money will go forever, and we have a responsibility to take care of everybody else, and they don't necessarily need to do anything for themselves. I just wonder what's going to happen. The dependence bomb, if you will, right? Everybody's dependent, and very few people know how to take care of themselves anymore. But I think in some of these old school Southern guys will do just fine. They may not have a lot of money, and they may have an old truck, but they're going to still be getting on down the road. Just a couple thoughts there. And I know this has kind of been all over the place. It was just kind of some thoughts that I picked up on the time that I was there. I'll return for a Texas Tuesday tomorrow, and might have to talk about the state of education. I've been made aware of several things, and it's just times are changing, and I'm not convinced they're for the better. With that, my friends, this is According to Callus. I will see you on the other side.